So, what does this have to do with museums? I think that a Renaissance is about all of us being conscious about our own personal narratives. And I want to introduce you to someone. This is George C. Page. George C. Page is my very favorite Renaissance man. He was born in 1901, and he's dead now, and his story started with an orange. It's an orange right there in the middle. When he was 11 years old, and around, that would have been about 1912, my math is not very good. In 1912, he was living in Fremont, Nebraska. Fremont, Nebraska is in the middle of nowhere. Isn't that true? Those of you who've been to America. He was living in Fremont, Nebraska, and his teacher gave him an orange. It was the first time he'd ever seen an orange. It was the first time he'd ever had an orange. And at 11, he decided he was going to live in California, where that orange came from. When he was 16 years old, his stepfather said, "You're a man now. Get out of the house." And at 16, he took his few belongings and he hitchhiked to California and got a job as a waiter and made just enough money to live in a rooming house. And the very first Christmas he spent in California, he decided he wanted his mother and his two young stepbrothers to have oranges. And so he brought some paper and he bought some crates and he packed up the oranges carefully to ship them. And so many people who were living in the boarding house with him liked the idea that they asked him to do that. And George C. Page started a company called Mission Pack that was the first company to ship oranges across the United States so everybody in America could have oranges when they wanted. I just want you to remember the name George C. Page and know that he never forgot his past and he used it to change his future. I want to tell you a little bit about my narrative. I believe in the magic in the world. I believe that it was wonderful when I woke up this morning at breakfast and a white crane flew down and stopped outside the window. And Dr. Lee said, "Did you take a picture?" And I said, "I didn't want to take a picture. I just want to know that I was in Taiwan and a crane came down and flew on the window." I believe I was sitting out on the porch during one of the breaks, and I believe that those mountains out there are alive. Nowhere in America have I ever been where I've seen trees that wave back and forth like that, and it's easy for me to believe that there are spirits out there. When I was 8 or 9 years old, I was sick one day, and when I was sick, my mother would let me sleep in my parents' bed. And after a day of being sick, my father came home from work, and he walked into the bedroom, and he handed me this book, The Ringmaster's Secret. It's a Nancy Drew mystery. He handed me the book, and he said, "I used to read these when I was a little girl." And he walked out of the room. And I sat in that room, in that bed, and wondered when my father had been a little girl. And if he'd been a little girl and grew up to be a man, did that mean that I was going to grow up to be a man? I wasn't very smart, you can see. Those of you who've had Barbies, I'm assuming I'm speaking to the women in the room, know that Barbie cannot stand up. And she can't stand up because she has to wear these shoes. And so the doll manufacturers have shaped Barbie's feet so she can wear high heels. Again, as a child, I thought I would become a woman when my feet grew to that shape, and that would be when I would be able to wear high heels. I just want you to know, so I've always sort of had a strange view. I take the world at face value. I have a son who does exactly the same thing. This is my only son, Nicholas. He's the one on the right. That's his friend Helen on the left. And when Nicholas was 7, we were driving in a car, and we came to a stop sign, and he looked out at the fire hydrant, and he said, "I think it's just wonderful the way they get all that water into that little piece of metal." And I almost didn't want to tell him the truth. You know, from his point of view, there was something magic about a fire hydrant. He didn't need to know about hoses. He just had to believe that there was water in the fire hydrant. So, I believe that museums are places of magic. I believe that museums help us make sense of ourselves. And recently, look, I've gone away from my papers. I can go back to my papers here. I'm passionate about storytelling. And recently I've been rereading a book that was published in 1998 in the United States. It's called The Presence of the Past, Popular Uses of History in American Life by Roy Rosenzweig and David Thalen. And what they did was in 1994, they did long phone interviews with 1,500 Americans from all walks of life, all kinds of people, to find out how they used history. And they made a wonderful discovery, or what I think is a wonderful discovery. What they discovered was people assemble their pasts into narratives that allow them to make sense of their personal histories, to set priorities, to project what might happen next, and to try to shape the future. The good news for museums in 1998 was Rosenzweig and Thalen looked at the trustworthiness of sources. And in terms of history, the most trusted source of history was museums, right up there at the top, followed by personal accounts from grandparents or other relatives, conversations with someone who was there, a witness, so that's third after museums, college history professors, secondary education teachers, nonfiction books, movies and television programs. I don't know if we did the survey today, if we would still be in that order. But that was good news in 1998. The difficulty in 1998 was the how to help visitors attain their goals of assembling their narratives. And then social media arrived. Jewel and I have been having conversations about social media, and I confess, I started out not liking social media. I'm not always a fan. At its worst, I think it's a lot of noise that sends museum professionals scurrying to pander to audience demands like an overindulgent parent to a whiny child's cry for candy, candy, candy. But I do think that social media initiatives developed in conscious alignment with the museum's mission can help make museums more deeply relevant to their core audience. This is the January 16th. This is the cover of the January 16th New Yorker magazine, which is a very interesting magazine, and in it there's an article about YouTube. And I read this article, and YouTube is reconsidering its business strategy. And here's what they said. The crucial difference between an information culture, Silicon Valley, and an entertainment culture, Hollywood, is that one culture is founded on abundance, providing people with what they want, that's Silicon Valley, and the other is predicated on scarcity, in keeping content from people. And I've got to say, when I read that, I was thinking it sounded a lot like libraries and abundance and museums and scarcity. So I think we need to have an abundance mentality. And here's what YouTube has said they're going to do. YouTube's reasoning seems to be this. We have this huge audience. They don't spend a lot of time on the site. If we had better programming and higher quality content, the kind that people wanted to connect with, they'd stay longer. I think this is a pretty good business decision on YouTube's part. And to be honest, I think this is the strategy that museums ought to be pursuing. And it's a direction that aligns with the mission of every single person in this room. I'd like to point out that YouTube's focus is not about better parking, it's not about more amenities, it's not about a great museum store or a restaurant, and it's not about mobile tours. It's not about the accessories to what we do. It's about the content, and it's about the connections with people. Museums are not Silicon Valley. Museums are not Hollywood. Museums potentially transcend both. So, what would trust look like? What would trust look like for museums if museums became places where visitors and staff could connect with collections to make sense of personal histories, to set priorities, to project what might happen next, and to try to shape the future? How do we ensure a Renaissance with a capital R? I have 5 suggestions. I feel like I should slow down now because I've read really, really fast, and I'm going to finish sooner than I expected. Whoops. So, my first suggestion, T-shirts are the new galleries. No, we should continue to curate and create content. That's our job. That's what we do best. And we should accept content from all sorts of sources. We should accept content from curators. We should look to our museum professional education staffs. We should look to our museum volunteer staffs. We should look to K through 12 teachers and students. We should look at the communities next door, the specialist a world away, and the student who brings a new and unexpected way of looking things. We can all be curators. I'm not suggesting here that all content is created equal, and I think we have to find some good way to differentiate between authoritative content and visitor-produced content, but honestly, we do have some visitors who know more about things. There are very few curators who can know everything